Welcome to the Rock's Back Pages podcast. I'm Barney Hoskins, and I'm in Hammersmith, London, with my colleague Jasper Mirison-Bowie.
Hello, Barney.
Joining us for this episode to discuss one of the true heavyweights of American music journalism are Daniel Wolff and Danny Alexander. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Daniel is the author of the excellent Sam Cooke biography, You Send Me, and several other great books. And Danny published the acclaimed Mary J. Blige biography, Real Love, No Drama, in 2016. A few years ago, they came together to compile Kick Out the Jams, a collection of what the book's subtitle calls Jibes, Barbs, and Rallying Cries by the great Dave Marsh, who turns 75 on March 1st. Published in 2023, the book is an absolute blast, and we're going to ask its editors about Dave's career from Creem magazine to Rock and Rap Confidential, and plus we'll hear clips from an audio interview with one of Dave's musical heroes, Curtis Mayfield. Daniel, let's start with you, since it was Dave Marsh's championing of your Sam Cooke book that led to our publishing an excerpt from In Mojo in January 1995. So we had some connection way back then, but that is almost exactly 30 years ago, if my maths hasn't let me down, as it usually does. Daniel, what was your first exposure to Dave's writing? And was it a jibe, a barb, or a rallying cry?
You remember the jibes and the barbs better than you do the rallying cries. So it might have been one of those. I think I probably first read Dave actually with his Springsteen biography, his first Springsteen biography. I wasn't the sort of guy who poured through rock magazines. I should have been, but somehow my mother failed me, I guess. But I knew of Dave, and then I read the Springsteen stuff, and I met him actually through my wife rather than as fellow writers. The story briefly is that my wife made a video to Springsteen music. I showed up to meet Dave. When she showed it to him, I was wearing an Elvis belt buckle. He took one look at it and said, "You're going to be my friend." Oh. I said, "It's a deal."
That's a lovely story. And Danny, where did you first, as it were, intersect with the Marsh byline?
Well, it would be when I was about 13 reading Rolling Stone. And I had an older brother who was, would say there's certain names you should look out for, Real Marcus, Dave Marsh. But Dave immediately leapt off the page at me. I used to read American Grandstand, and the thing I remember, I don't know where they fit in. I don't think they're jibes, barbs, or maybe rallying cry. But the things I remember, when some little, note progression, on a song or something, and he would talk about it, and it was something that had already hit me, but it someone was validating that they heard it ttoo. It's a great connection.
That's lovely.
Yeah, he felt like my friend at 13, He was just speaking right to me. So
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Shall we go back to Detroit in 1969 and the founding of Creem magazine, which is the featured subject on this week's homepage on Rock's Back Pages. Creem, for any listeners who may not be aware of this, is where Dave Marsh started out as a writer and then editor. And Daniel, just why don't you, in synoptic form, tell us exactly what Creem represented vis-a-vis the other music publications that popped up in the late 60s?
Well, I think it represented chaos, probably. Dave describes himself as a 19-year-old with no prospects. He'd spent a semester going to Wayne State and decided that wasn't for him. He'd loved music already since he was a young teenager. And Creem was, I think both a goof and a sort of fuck you that turned serious, partly because the writing was so good. Dave's and Lester Bangs, Reel got involved, and they were unknowns at the time. And it was at first almost a broadsheet. It was nothing, and eventually got distributed all over the United States. And in those years, it was very hard to find any intelligent discussion of rock and roll because, of course, it wasn't important. It was done by outcasts, et cetera, et cetera. And Creem, simultaneously took it seriously and made fun of it in a way that absolutely rang true.
Totally right. It's funny. One of the pieces that we're featuring actually is from the Detroit Free Press in December 1970. So not much longer than a year after Creem started. And the headline of the piece is Creem reflects Detroit rock and roll and tries to direct the monster, quote unquote. And Dave is quoted in it. He says, I think Creem is a pretty good reflection of where Detroit is at rock and roll wise. We tend to write about the kind of loud, noisy, metallic music that comes out of here. Rolling Stone says we're spunky. I like that. So it's already getting very interreferential, isn't it? He's quoting Rolling Stone about Creem. So it's very inside baseball. Another piece is actually something Dave wrote himself in 1981 after Creem's founder Barry Kramer died at the very young age of 37. And Dave says, in those days, Creem was not so much a job or even a publication as it was a non-stop raving, brawling family. And this had something, but not everything, to do with the fact that all or most of us lived in one dilapidated Detroit slum building, which, of course, we've all seen pictures of. So that just ties in with what you're saying about the kind of chaos of it. It was in some ways the anti-Rolling Stone. Danny, what did you have to? I don't know how. I'm not going to take a guess at your age, but did you have to play catch up with Creem to some degree?
Oh yeah, I never even saw the original Creem. I mean, there was Creem that was just. It seemed like when I was reading Dave Creem, I knew more for the pictures and the captions than for the copy in a way. But the old Creem where they would go on with their extended essays and things, I didn't see that till I was probably 24 or something in a used record store, and they'd have them stacked up. Of course, Dave put out a book in 1985 of his greatest hits at the time or whatever, and he had some Creem things in there that I read. And of course, I knew Lester Bang's best from Creem because he would show up. He was part of the culture that you heard about a lot, and you'd read him when you could. So yeah.
Yes, Bang's for a number of reasons overshadows the career, the achievement of Dave Marsh, and that probably has something to do with the fact that he died very young too, because that does give you a sort of strange immortality, even when all your kind of peer group and contemporaries are still alive. Now, both of them wrote about the MC5 and the Stooges, and we thought we would just listen to a clip of Dave speaking to you, Daniel, for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. With your blessing, we're going to just listen to Dave talking about Detroit.
If I made a name for myself initially in music writing, beyond being the partisan of the MC5, and in particular, more than anybody, I was the champion of the Stooges in the press, because I was the one who understood that there was something more than noise. And it seemed like at the time, in that area, I was the only one who got it about Iggy and how great he really is. That was how much was going on in Detroit back then. Everybody, including Lester Bangs, was looking at me like, well, this is a pile of noise, which it was. But it was noise with a function. It was noise with a purpose.
Well, it's 1969, okay. Well, I totally concur with that. And that was a great conversation you had with Dave.
And it gives us the title of our next book, which is Something More Than Noise. We'll just take that and run with
it. Very good. Yeah. And of course, Kick Out the Jams, the book that came out 2 years ago, it's named after, I guess, the most famous MC5 song, isn't it? It's lovely listening to Dave. I met Dave a couple of times back in the 90s, and he was quite formidable, just kind of on casual acquaintance. Do you know? I mean, he just said exactly what he felt. I liked him, but I was sort of on my guard a little bit because you just thought if I say something stupid, he's going to jump down my throat. Now, Dave does have a different standing, doesn't he, to the Greil Marcuses, and the Bangses and Toshes. He sort of stands alone, and I kind of like that about him. I mean, where would you place him in that kind of pantheon, and what is different about him?
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to my mind is his intense awareness of class and race, and the thought he put into what those things meant in American culture, and what they had to do with what the music was all about. And he was a young man with no prospects, right? I mean, he really came from a different world than a lot of the people that he ended up working with, and he never for a moment forgot that, and forgot that was a particular strength he might have too, So, and that scrappiness that you were describing, that could be very intimidating or whatever. I always took it as he was so, I don't know anyone who sort of reached out to everyone as if they were old friends or maybe adversaries, but he would just sort of immediately engage you in a sort of a barroom conversation or whatever. Yes. about the music. And yes. I think saw the audience as an equal, someone not to talk down to, someone not to pander to, not to condescend to in any way, because that was certainly a reflection of himself in many ways. Right?
Yeah, I think he was rigorous in a way maybe his fellow critics weren't quite as much. He demanded some proof. When you said Led Zeppelin was the best band in the world, he said, yeah, why? And you had to explain it, right?
You actually think, yes.
Right. And that's competitive, especially if you've just met the guy and you're, like Danny says, standing at the bar and goes, isn't Led Zeppelin great? And he goes, why? And you go, fuck.
Yeah.
So did you know him from his writing before you met him?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't tell you what the first piece I wrote, but it probably would have been in, Creem or Stone.
I think for me, what fits into what you just said, Daniel, is that, he had a particular conception of what he thought his job was. There's a quote from an interview that Scott Woods did with him. He says, I'm not trying to write from the point of view of a musician. I'm not trying to write from the point of view of a record industry insider. That's not what I do. And I think that speaks to his clarity of duty, as it were. And I wonder if either of you could expand on what you think he feels his duty is as a writer.
Well, I think what Danny said is right, that he liked being a fan, for one thing. He was a fan speaking to other fans, and that was the community. And so I think that he was rigorous about that, the way you would be with your friends sitting in your bedroom at night and trying to prove why Led Zeppelin was the greatest band in the world. You had to go, this cut right here, that solo, that's what did it. It's part of why the writing lasts so well, I think, is that he demanded that it be rigorous that way, that it have some factual basis, not just, I really feel good about this record or whatever, or even I can dance to it. That was always a high criteria for him, but then he wanted to explain why you could dance to it and why you wanted to.
Yes. Exactly. You got this lovely postscript out of Pete Townsend at the back of Kick Out the Jams. And Pete says, Dave was not always kind to us, meaning obviously The Who, which is the subject of one of Dave's books, Before I Get Old. He wasn't always kind, period. It was about 50-50, he says. His truth, his opinions, and his critique were always sharply penned, and he expected great things from us, from me especially. He was literate and smart, and he regarded rock music as a new form of socio-political force that had massive potential for change for the better, culturally, artistically, and politically. I believe this too. It was hard for both of us to live up to. Interesting little thought there. But I can imagine, them two kind of going at it, actually, So,
well, Barney, he had a vision, Dave, as a vision still, about equality and justice, those words that are so hard to talk about, that he saw in rock and roll, that he saw in popular music. And that was really important to him. And Pete Townsend would, sometimes get there. And he wanted him to get there all the time. And it was true of Frank Zappa. It was true of Curtis Mayfield. It was true of Aretha Franklin. He could see the light that was his vision in some of their work, and he wanted more. And he wanted everyone to share it.
His Wikipedia page, as we were talking before we started recording, is sort of littered with incredibly harsh dismissals, some of which I more or less agree with. But sometimes Dave's opinions were just like, how can you even say that? And one of them is like about John Bonham, where he sort of basically claimed that he was an insurmountable flaw in Zeppelin and something like clinically incompetent. I mean, as a Zeppelin fan, and we talked in the last episode with Danny Goldberg, I mean, I'm just baffled by that. And I'm obviously just hearing John Bonham differently from the way Dave Marsh hears him. But, and then I think somewhere he just described Lauryn Hill as a completely tuneless singer. Again, mystified. But then I do like the fact that he described Journey as a dead end for San Francisco area rock. And I was absolutely with him on Kiss. Kiss is not a great band. Kiss was never a great band. Kiss never will be a great band. Which is ironic given that Creem became like so receptive to the sort of hype around Kiss. But I kind of like those opinions, but I do also understand that Dave has put a lot of backs up over the years, and he doesn't bother him. He's clearly reveled in doing that. You guys have got to know him, I guess, pretty well over the years. And I mean, how has he ever put your backs up?
Endlessly.
Where do we start?
Yeah, okay.
Dave gets bored easily.
Yes, yes.
And he wants to stir the pot.
Yeah.
And somebody comes up and says, Lauryn Hill is the best thing since Ella Fitzgerald. And you get the kind of quote you just read in response, which is another way of saying, prove it. Because the thing about Dave, getting your back up was that it led to more conversation. It wasn't the end of a conversation. It led to more of it. When I worked on what was then called Rock and Roll Confidential, I'd come home in tears and my wife would say, what's the problem? And I said, well, Dave just took me apart on, fill in the blank. Why Creem has nothing to do with rock and roll, the band. Why the band Creem has nothing to do with rock and roll. And I couldn't defend myself. He just attacked and attacked. And the next time we met, it was totally gone. He said, thank you for that discussion about Creem. It helped my thinking a lot. And you'd move on.
Yeah.
Danny, did he make you cry?
No, but I wasn't in those meetings.
No.
We dealt with each other although we wrestled through I wrote a couple articles with him, and that's pretty tough.
Yeah.
He was gentler with me. I think he saw me a little bit as sort of a younger kid brother or something, and was tended to. But he never hesitated. I mean, he never hesitated to like call me on anything he thought was BS. It was funny. He has this infamous dislike of the Grateful Dead. And he always knew I was a Deadhead, and I mean not like traveling, following the band, and making huge claims for them, but that they were very important to me in a way. And he actually showed me a lot of respect for that. And the first thing I wrote for Rock and Rap Confidential was not the first thing, but I did write when Jerry Garcia died. I wrote a little piece about him and the importance of him in rural Oklahoma. And when I was growing up. So he just wanted people to say what they thought, the way he said what he thought. And I was a bit shy and quiet and listened more than I talked, which probably saved me from a few.
Yeah, I should have learned from you.
You do get the sense that some of these utterances are really kind of intended to shock and provoke more than they are kind of like, they could be sort of vociferously backed up, I am sure, but at the same time, there's would agree that there's something fun about provoking people in that way to defend themselves and to defend the things they care about, because it leads to interesting conversations rather than just regurgitating the accepted wisdom over and over again.
Right. I mean, if you love Iggy Pop, you love outrageous behavior. You love provocative statements. You love, and that was part of Dave's arsenal.
Totally.
No fun to be alone. I said to be alone. I said to be alone.
I mean, given that I must have said about like 10 minutes ago that Creem was kind of the anti-Rolling Stone. It's sort of ironic that Dave moves to New York and is at Rolling Stone for 5 years, from 75 to 80. And I don't know how you see that period. I mean, clearly when he got there, it felt to him just as kind of stimulating and exciting as Creem had been in a different way. Maybe by the end, as certainly for me, Rolling Stone had become a different thing from its inception. Do you think that by the time he left, he had become, pretty disenchanted with the, not to put too fine a point on it, the kind of star fucking element of Rolling Stone, covers shot by Annie Leibovitz and so forth. I don't know if he ever, I'm sure if I go back and read everything, he did fall out with Jan Wenner, but I don't know whether that's the case. In any case, he left. And then not long after that, I know he worked for Newsday, lots of stuff there, kind of regular gig as it were, but 1983, he launches what was then, as you say, Rock and Roll Confidential. And that's almost felt like, to me at the time, because we used to get sent Rock and Roll Confidential at NME, where I was on staff for a bit, it felt like his reaction to the sort of star fucking side of Rolling Stone. So discuss. Daniel, why don't you start with that?
Well, first off, I don't think he ever fell out with Jan Wenner.
Okay.
He thought Jan was a great editor.
Sure.
He may not have been a great boss, that I don't know about, but he thought he was a great, line by line editor. And he enjoyed that part of Rolling Stone. I think part of the problem, and it's why Rock and Roll Confidential started, was he couldn't say the stuff he wanted to say.
Yes.
He didn't feel like he could attack the music industry as vociferously as he wanted to at Rolling Stone. He also has enormous ears, so he wanted to talk about free jazz and doo-wop and all kinds of other things that weren't the latest style at Rolling Stone. So he drifted away from it, and he also wanted to write books, because the first book happens as he leaves Rolling Stone. So I think, I've never heard him say a bad word about Rolling Stone or the experience. It was a great forum for him, and he got to do some cool things. I mean, he wrote essentially a whole feature piece about not being able to talk to Mick Jagger, as I remember.
Yes.
Right? And that gave him a little room to
yes.
vent.
Or is it called something? I call and call.
Right, exactly.
And Mick doesn't
Mick,
answer.
Yeah. So, I don't think he fell out. I think he moved on.
Right. Well, that's a much better way of putting it. Danny, would you agree with that?
I think, well, Dave was sort of famous for explosive moments with various people. And I think there was a big moment with Jan when he did not want him to run an open letter to Michael Jackson, which led to his book Trapped. And Dave ran it anyway. And this, but to Dave, as we were talking about before, he, to argue, to defy whatever he did in that moment. I mean, I think there was probably a time they didn't speak, and but he was still working around him, and he was working at Record after that, which was a Rolling Stone, subsidiary?
Well, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's a really, really good point. And we have some of Dave's record pieces on Rock's back pages. So, you're absolutely right. I mean, also just kind of tangentially in connection with Daniel, you mentioned Dave's first book, which of course was Born to Run, the first of, four books about Springsteen. And, so in the context of, I don't know, getting too close to the people you worship. There was a great interview with Dave on rockcritics.com from 2001. And there's an excellent quote in there. Scott Woods, who did the interview, says, "You're obviously pretty close to Springsteen, and I think you've been stupidly criticized for that. As some listeners will know, Dave was and still is married to Barbara Carr, who co-managed Bruce Springsteen." And Dave responds to Scott. He says, "It's funny because I have this contradictory reputation. On the one hand, for being this kind of acerbic, troublemaking, fire-starting, invective, brandishing, bully, tough guy, whatever. And on the other hand, being this callow sap for celebrities, i.e., just a little too kind of cozy with the boss." So, I mean, what is your take on that? And have you ever either of you had to kind of defend Dave from people who say, well, his Springsteen books are hagiography, which they are absolutely clearly not. Daniel, does anyone take an issue with that whole project?
Yeah, I think that's been an issue all along. I think it's been an issue for Dave as well as for people around him. He, as I said before, he was a fan. That was how he saw himself. So if he had to sit down and interview Little Richard, he wasn't going to say anything critical. He wanted to know how Little Richard got the magic he got and to talk about that. And I think he was the same way with Springsteen or with Curtis Mayfield or the scores of people he talked to. He was both in awe of what they could do and critically demanding that they keep doing it and that they make good stuff. I think his relationship with Springsteen is, when you have another 3-hour broadcast, we could go into it. I think it's very complicated. And I think it's still sort of on and off, critical, praiseworthy, so on and so forth. But for Dave, Bruce was, Elvis reborn in some ways. And that's an enormous burden for both of them, I think.
I wanted to just quote from, the last of the pieces by Dave that we're featuring is for Let It Rock from December 1974, and it's entitled Bruce Springsteen, Shouldn't He Be Famous? ? And I just read the first excerpts from the first couple of paragraphs. He had just seen Bruce at the Avery Fisher Hall in New York, I think. So it was difficult to tell just when the stage caved in. It seemed to happen during Rosalita, the last song before the encore. But maybe that's just when the crush of Bruce Springsteen fans seeking to touch their hero began. Bruce who? Bruce Springsteen, the young singer-songwriter from Asbury Park, New Jersey, who many people feel is going to be the greatest new rock star of the 70s. With his mangy beard and his greasy hair, he reminds many of that other symbol of alienation, James Dean. Dressed in an inevitably sleeveless T-shirt and mirror sunglasses, no matter how dark the hall, Springsteen, playing guitar and singing, is the most mesmerizing rock performer to emerge since Bette Midler. I don't know quite how Midler gets in there, but anyway, she was very hot at the time, right? Anyway, so this is Dave pretty early on. Certainly before Springsteen has gotten anywhere near superstardom. What do you think when you hear that? I mean, clearly the admiration is really sincere, and many people felt the same way, didn't they, Danny, about Bruce?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Like there was a reason there was a new excitement in music. And from where I was sitting, it was akin to what was happening in punk and especially as it developed. And he makes that argument to some degree at the front of Born to Run that Bruce is really a kind of punk. When at the time when those things are sort of being defined, right? So he captured that. I mean, I read those pieces he wrote in Rolling Stone about Bruce, and that was some of the most exciting, writing I'd ever. I mean, it was like music. It's when people talk about Creem being like rock and roll. In that mid late 70s, Dave Marsh on Bruce Springsteen stuff is I felt like I was so lucky to be alive when this stuff was coming out. It was amazing. And I would add that I thought that in some ways when he did call out Bruce, it was really stinging. Like, he did it on that second version of Born to Run where he has the river. And he talks about the no nukes thing, and he's appalled that Bruce both threw a birthday cake back at the crowd, and said, send me the cleaning bill or whatever. And that he also dragged his ex-girlfriend, Lynn Goldberg, up on stage and humiliated her because she was taking pictures and she wasn't supposed to be at the show. And he wrote those things. I remember as a fan, and this was the ultimate sort of fan writer, he was really calling him out. I mean, it had a weight that I can't imagine it would have had if it was from a farther distant, more distant perspective. And even Nebraska, like he wrote about Nebraska differently than other people. He was actually worried about Bruce's mental health, I think, when he was making that record, where the direction of what he was doing is going.
Which is, I think, a way a lot of us felt listening to Nebraska.
So hallowed today, but it was like, what is this? It was a bit, it was a bit troubling in a way. Which
just to be clear, I think you meant Lynn Goldsmith. It's probably
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's fine. It's probably because we were talking about Michael Goldberg and Danny Goldberg.
Yeah, that's right. It's in my head.
Goldberg's on the brain. I just want to quote. There's a quote from Bruce on the back of Kick Out the Jams, and it's just worth reading. It's very short. I connected to Dave because I knew he felt about music the way I felt about it. It was life-sustaining. It was central to your existence. And I guess Daniel, you talk about a complicated relationship there, but that relationship was definitely forged around this passion, this kind of missionary zeal. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And I think the issues that Danny brought up earlier about class and race were central to Bruce and to Dave, and are central to them both. Mm-hmm. It's not a subject that gets solved. It goes on, and you don't always even make progress on it. But Springsteen was willing to keep tackling it in a way that it was hard to find, I think, in other acts. I mean, it's part of the attraction of The Who, I think, was that the class issue was very clear there. And for Springsteen, it was class and race. And, we'd argue about it because I think Dave was always supportive of Bruce. And I would sometimes say, it seems to me he's kind of opting out of these issues. He's finding an easy way out. Born in the USA, the whole record, I kind of went, well, yeah, now he's a big superstar, but look what he didn't talk about to get there. And Dave would have none of that. He'd say, yeah, but look what he did talk about. And he was actually making some progress here. So I think, in fact, privately, Dave was more critical of Bruce than he was publicly. But there, as Danny says, there was some of it publicly, too. Again, because of these incredibly high standards of what was supposed to be achieved by rock and roll. It was the promised land.
I mean, this does bring us back to Rock and Roll Confidential / Rock and Rap Confidential. And I'd just be fascinated to know about the founding of that. Were you involved, Daniel, from the word go? And just explain to our listeners exactly what it was and what its kind of mission statement was.
I was involved, I would say, from the inhalation after the word go. They said go, and I said, can I help?
What were you doing at that time?
Writing poetry.
Okay.
But I had an Elvis belt buckle, so that qualified me.
Yeah, even if you'd never listened to a rock and roll record in your life,
exactly,
you were wearing that belt.
Well, it's part of who Dave. It's part of who Dave is. If he sees someone who, for whatever reason, seems likely to him as a collaborator or someone to have a conversation, he welcomes them in and wants to talk to him. Whether it's the guy carrying the package to his front door or whether it's another writer, he's interested. Rock and Roll Confidential there was a newsletter that came out in the 50s during the Red Scare in America by Izzy Stone, who was a journalist, who essentially had been blacklisted and so sent out his own newsletter. Lefty, biting, critical, very well-researched. And I think that was the model in some ways for Rock and Roll Confidential, which is Dave saying, I can't say what I want to say in major publications. I want a forum where I can have this discussion and where other people can, because there were lots of guest writers who came in and wrote in, and there was a letter column, and he wanted that dialogue to go on.
Yes.
Danny, what do you think its maximum circulation was? 5,000 copies?
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
at the most, but
A lot of
incredibly-
industry people. Yeah.
Yeah. But very influential. And, the collected Rock and Roll or Rock and Rap Confidential is a document about our times that it would be hard to surpass as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
It all comes through music, but it's about everything from, Ronald Reagan and censorship to the pleasures of screwing. I mean, it went the full range. And it's an amazing thing. And he kept it going for a long time. He and Lee Ballinger, who was kind of his right-hand man.
Yes. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we subscribed at NME. I'm talking 83. I guess because it launched in May 83, and I think we took a subscription pretty much straight away. So I was there till about 85. So it would, regularly appear, and we all wanted to get our hands on it. And at NME, it was very influential because it was a kind of wake up to we need to be kind of dealing with the political and social issues that surround popular music. And indeed, that's what happened at NME. There were lots of pieces that weren't even strictly to do with music at all. And I think Rock and Roll Confidential had at least something to do with that. It was a real wow, this is pretty serious stuff, as well as, entertaining. Can you remember when it became Rock and Rap Confidential and the discussions around that? When did that moment happen?
It's about 88 or 89, isn't it, Daniel? I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I was on board by this point.
You were, Danny. Okay.
86, 87. 86, the first thing I ever wrote for it. And then a little bit later, I just kept sending them stuff, and every once in a while they print it, and then they couldn't shake me. But I wanted to mention there, and I'm afraid I maybe lost the thread of what you were asking, but I wanted to mention that, to the extent that he was a music industry insider, because he was plunged into it. He was, being married to Barbara Carr and watching the Springsteen thing and all sorts of, he would write, I think he would, Rock and Rap Confidential really reflects that, three-dimensional view of what's going on. He came out of, when he was young, a lot of political activism too, which he carried through with him. And I think, so he was always writing as a fan, as you said, I think, Jasper, but he was also writing as a fan who had looked behind the curtain, and could bring things back that would be useful for other people to know, and to strategize direction and that sort of thing. But I don't really remember the conversations. It was just apparent that hip hop was a big part of what we were doing, and that it was a time to make a statement with regard to how important hip hop was in the late 80s. It was just exploding. So
yeah, Dave once said to me, he said, somebody just criticized me by saying that everything you write is about race. And Dave's response was, absolutely. I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to say rock and roll by, as you say, the mid to late 80s was to leave out this enormous side of music, or appear to. And he didn't want to leave it out.
Totally. I love the fact that Dave sort of says, I don't really believe in movements, so at that moment when it was interesting what you said about Springsteen, Danny, and I really agree that I think Springsteen had a lot to do with kind of ushering in the kind of punk rock revolt against the sort of bloated stadium megastars. I think Springsteen was part of that, even though the punks themselves would probably not have said so. But I like the fact that Dave, he didn't kind of immediately denounce all the music he'd listened to before just because this scene was happening in downtown Manhattan, right? And there's a quote in that rockcriticsInterview.com interview I mentioned. He says, look, I'm not going to give up liking Bootsy Collins. For that matter, I'm not going to give up liking Jackson Browne. I think that's really interesting. And he says, if the price of this is becoming musically narrower, I'd never have voted yes for that. Even with the MC5, which seems like the narrowest possible thing, you go look at those early issues of Creem, and we're writing about Charles Mingus. We're writing about Ray Charles. So, right back at the beginning of his career, he's not like, I'm the MC5 Stooges guy. And in some ways, I think his kind of taste was was significantly broader than Lester Bangs's was. I mean, because he says somewhere I can't remember where this is. He says, it wasn't me that wrote James Taylor Marked for Death, which was the legendary Who Put the Bomb screed that Lester spewed out, which we all kind of loved. But Lester would never have written anything favorable about Jackson Browne. I don't think. I doubt, right? So I think all this is I mean, I kind of admire it because I think as one gets older, you just like, well, I'm not going to put down these like illusory boundaries between styles of music. This is cool and that isn't cool. I think Dave has been very true to his kind of heart around this stuff.
Absolutely. So he was never quite a hipster that way. I always think of hipsters as having those boundaries set down. How can you be listening to fill in the blank, Elvis Presley, whoever it was?
Yes.
And if Dave got moved, he was moved, and there was no denying it. And the job was to find out why and who else was moved by it. In some ways, he's sweatier than other critics. Sweatier, yeah. I think he's sweatier.
Okay. Oh, because he refers to Lester as that I love that smelly old bastard. So
well, Dave believed, he used to say this. He said, I like vulgar. I'm for vulgar. I think it's a good thing. And, I remember being sort of shocked by that. Doesn't vulgar imply that it's a bad thing? And no, Iggy and the Stooges, whoever it is, vulgar. That's good. That shakes things up. That starts us towards change.
That's also a class thing. It's a real clear sense of class and being unwashed. And and I think he never, he never forgot a lot of things, but he never forgot that the record that really sort of changed his life, he wrote so beautifully about The Friend of Fortunate Son, was a Smokey Robinson record, and the Miracles. And that he was, when he was about the same age, about 14, he was buying Dionne Warwick records, and they were changing his life in different ways too, and things like that. Yes.
Well, then, of course, the heart of rock and soul, his 1001 greatest singles ever made, and that's the British cover. It is a Penguin paperback, and number one, of course, as anyone who has the book will remember, is I heard it through the grapevine. Marvin Gaye, who at one point he was working on a biography of Marvin.
One of the things that I love hearing him write and say, because he says it in different ways quite often, about the importance of rap and the kind of versus punk, disco versus punk. He gets into that in this rockcritics.com interview. He says, in the long run, do I think punk was more important than disco? I think in the long run, the way that punks who survived as musicians mainly sustained themselves by taking ideas from funk and disco. I think that answers the question right there. And do I think that the revolution in white rock and roll, or in part of white rock and roll, that happened in England and was stillborn in the United States with punk, approaches the significance of the rise of rap music? That's a silly idea. He's not afraid to set out that stall of like, well, rap is and will be more important than all of this kind of put together. And it's absolutely borne out by the truth of the matter now, which is that hip hop is the predominant form of popular music in the world today. It is just not just music, but in cultural terms as well, an absolutely vital force. I mean, Kendrick Lamar just played the Super Bowl halftime show, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And beyond that, it's also one of the predominant forms of social commentary within music and political statements within music. So everything kind of lines up in that sense, which I find really interesting.
Oh no! It's a cultural divide. I'm gonna get it on the floor. You really about to do it? 40 acres and a mule. This is bigger than the music. You really about to do it? Yeah, they tried to rig the game, but you can't fake influence. They get on it like that. Hey, I'm tripping, I'm sliding, I'm riding through the back like
What are the favorite things that you guys contributed to Rock and Roll, Rock and Rap Confidential? Are there particular pieces that you're proud of that you remember?
Well, I did a piece with Dave that's in the Kick Out the Jams book about Dorothy Love Coates, who's a gospel singer who I think is great. And so did Dave. And it was, I mean, as Danny alluded to earlier, it wasn't always fun to write with Dave. But in the end, you got something great out of it. And that was a piece, I'm very fond of.
Danny, how about you?
The first thing that comes to mind, but it's bad because I don't remember much about it, but I just remember writing a Tupac piece that I was very inspired to write late at night after he died, and it going on the front of the paper, And I thought, but that Springsteen thing was interesting. The Wrecking Ball. I think he was angry with me for pushing him to write it, and that's the way it felt. Like he was angry. Like his responses to me were angry, but it's like, God damn it, I guess we have to do this. It's like he was excited by some ideas there, and then we ended up writing it. But I just remember that the contribution I could most often make in many ways was I wrote a lot of things about women in there, which were, there were certain like kinds of music that I sort of covered a lot of niches, norteño and metal and various things.
Yes.
But I would also study the trade papers and things, and study the sales and study things like that to find an angle that would be really useful for the paper. And it was good. It was a good experience for me all along,
Did these experiences contribute to both of your later work on books that you've written?
Totally.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Dave's voice is always in the back of my head saying, prove it. Prove it. It says that, and it says something else too. He says, his voice to me always says, yeah, but what do you love? What do you really care about here? Because it's easy to get not even cynical, but critical about the world, which is, as we know, a perfect place. But Dave's voice is always going, yeah, but what do you love? What do you actually care about here? And that's a great thing to have in your head. And I'm not sure I had it before I spent time with him.
Yeah, I started writing for him, so it's very much a part of everything I do. But I do have to say that Dave's voice is in my head from the very first paper I ever sent him. I sent him a paper from school after I'd met him, and he wrote me back. It was a very nice letter, but the part that I remember almost gleefully was, what in the hell does the paragraph at the bottom of page 11 mean that couldn't be said with half the words and none of the academic gobbledygook? And that has guided me from to unlearn so much of what I learned in school, and it's been helpful all along. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great advice. I would imagine. So picking up from the sort of political themes that we discussed a little bit earlier, I wanted to quote from this piece that Dave wrote for Vox magazine here in the UK in late 1990. And it's a piece about the Star Spangled Banner, prompted or inspired by Sinead O'Connor, like refusing to allow it to be sung before one of her shows. I think that may not be absolutely accurate, but that's the kind of gist of it. So he writes about the Star Spangled Banner, and it seems more timely than ever in the insane, deranged kind of climate that we're in as the four of us sit here talking. So I'll just quote from this piece, and it will lead on to the audio interview almost seamlessly. So the song's unsingable melody, which even Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin found daunting, isn't the main problem. It's the blood-chilling lyrics which eagerly espouse militarism and manifest destiny. Yanks, still under the illusion that ours is a peace-loving nation, occasionally propose changing the anthem. One of the most frequently proposed alternatives is Woody Guthrie's "This Land is Your Land." Harold Leventhal, who runs the Guthrie estate, hates the concept. Can you imagine the Marines invading Panama? So I'm almost going to choke on that for obvious reasons. Can you imagine the Marines invading Panama singing that song? Woody would be horrified, he said. And then Dave says, my choice for an appropriate national anthem would be Curtis Mayfield's "This Is My Country," a 1968 soul hit for the Impressions. And he quotes from it. Some people think we don't have the right to say it's my country. Before they give in, they'd rather fuss and fight than say it's my country. I paid 300 years and more of slave-driven sweat and welts on my back. This is my country. hard to say those words without kind of choking up, really.
Some people think we don't have the right to say it's my country. Before they give in, they'd rather fuss and fight than say it's my country.
And I think from there, if you're okay with it, we'll go straight into the week's new audio interview, which Jasper can tell us something about.
Absolutely. I mean, those lyrics just send a chill down your spine, don't they, really? But the interview is with Curtis Mayfield, as stated. Edward Helmore is interviewing him for Mojo magazine in fall 1996. And he hears from Curtis Mayfield about the making of his then new album, New World Order. And obviously, it's all within the context that Curtis Mayfield was paralyzed from the neck down during a performance. Lighting equipment fell on him, and he was paralyzed from 1990 onwards. So he made New World Order with that disability. And he talks in the interview about how it was to record. And so let's listen to the first clip, which is about that.
Well, I wouldn't say that it was just quite easy. I had my ups and downs. Of course, it was just based upon my health.
Right.
Understanding my own limitations.
Yeah.
And then finding that once I got started, and the first song was New World Order, which was pretty much in my key.
Yeah.
It was brought to me unfinished, so it allowed me to write lyrics and write my own feels as to where I thought it ought to go, and it helped to lend my own signature. And gosh, then I became very warm with it. It just turned out very easy for me.
We got to make a change. It's a brand new day. A new world order, a brand new day. It's a new day. Change of mind for the human race.
Yeah, so that's him talking about that. And he talks very movingly about how much he wishes he could play the guitar again, and how the guitar is like his brother, and it's I mean, he's wonderful to listen to in this. He's so warm and reflective and thoughtful about just everything that he's asked about. I mean, there's one point at which Edward is asking him about, I guess, gangster rap and about Tupac and whether he sort of is. I think Edward is kind of asking whether he's offended or whether he objects to the language you say in rap, and he just flatly refuses to, in his words, put down any other musician's artistic expression. And I just think that sums him up in a really beautiful way, that even though he recognizes that he himself is different to that, he still won't kind of put Tupac down, and even if he might have wanted things to be expressed differently. And he just exudes this gratitude and this, gratitude of being alive, and reflects on what all that means. And he talks about the help of getting Aretha Franklin's help and Mavis Staples' help. And in the second clip that we'll listen to, he's responding to the question of whether he'll make another record.
But if I never make another record, I am just so proud of all the people I've met and I've come up with, and all the things that I've been allowed to be a part of through this great big business of music, and not to mention all the friends, I mean, from BMI, ASCAP, Harry Fox, Warner Brothers, all the companies, CBS, and even Barry Gordy. I mean, there's just been so much love amongst, a business that just totally took me in, and it's as though God said, here's a diploma. Start following the yellow brick road.
Ride on, Just get on back. Get on back. Living again. Get on back. Living again. Get on back. Living again. Go ahead. Living again. Right on. Go ahead, Mayfield.
I mean, my God, it's so rare to hear any artist not moaning and bitching about every record company they've ever been signed to. And I mean, I can't believe all of those that he named treated him or the Impressions that fairly. But there's just sort of something just so almost Pollyanna-ish about Curtis. He just exudes this kind of goodwill, doesn't he? And so I was really struck by that. I mean, such a beautiful man. I mean, it's not like his songs are Pollyanna-ish. They're as real as you can get, right? Worth mentioning, by the way, that it's almost exactly 60 years since the Impressions' People Get Ready was released and was a big hit. I mean, it got to number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100. And I guess it may be their most famous song. Guys, what are your personal feelings about Curtis Mayfield? Daniel, where do you come in with Curtis?
I think he's a link in a great chain that goes back before recorded music and continues on. Jasper mentioned Kendrick Lamar. There's no Kendrick Lamar without Curtis Mayfield.
For sure.
That's for sure. To tie the two together, it was a kind of intelligence and emotional intelligence that Dave still cares a lot about. And on the streets of Chicago, Curtis Mayfield may not have seemed to have been anybody, but he was a very important spokesperson, as we just heard, both in his music and just in an interview like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so important to Dave, as is, though Curtis Mayfield may have had no ill will toward the record companies, Dave clearly blamed them for what happened to him, the accident on the stage, or the people that were handling it, and the accident that paralyzed him.
Yeah.
And no, it's just Daniel said it well. I can't help finding myself. I think about the fact that People Get Ready then worked its way into what I think may be the best Bruce Springsteen song, which is Land of Hope and Dreams, which became the name of a Dave Marsh podcast, right? So
yeah, of course,
for years. And
that's lovely.
And I remember the first time I heard that record when he starts going into the Impressions. And, that part of it is like, I think I had to pull over the car. It was making that connection so powerfully. We get ready for the trip, this train that takes everybody, right?
Yeah. That's lovely. I mean, I always feel that Curtis Mayfield should be right up there with, the Marvin Gayes and the Aretha Franklins. And for whatever reason, he isn't. And maybe that's something to do with the fact that he, some of the things that I was talking about, that he was just such a sweet guy. I mean, there's this sort of terrible irony that it's the really troubled souls, right? that everybody sort of becomes obsessed with. It's almost like Curtis was this sort of, wise seer, but I mean, the genius of his
sweetness to his voice too, which sometimes we don't take as seriously as something that sounds rougher or like
and edgier. Yeah.
It's unique. I mean, there's nobody ever sounded like Curtis, but I mean the brilliance of his writing, his lyrics, his guitar playing, for fuck's sake, his productions for others. The wonder of the Impressions harmonies. I saw them play this reunion tour in 1983 at the Hollywood Bowl, and it was just like one of those transcendent experiences. It was so beautiful. Jerry Butler did a little set, Curtis did a little set, and then the Impressions did their greatest hits, and it was just like, it was such a beautiful thing. Everything from like Freddie's Dead to, on the one hand, to kind of the makings of You at the other sort of end of the spectrum, right? The tenderness of that. Anyway, I just think the guy, like you say, no Curtis, no Kendrick. And I think that's absolutely right. But I wish more people would discover him and listen to him and revere him.
And I wish more people would get ready.
Yeah. Yes. Very, very well put. There's the piece right at the beginning of Kick Out the Jams, Dance with the Devil from RRC, Dave Marsh and Grill Marcus writing together. And it's basically, it's just before the 1984 elections that Reagan won. And they write at the end, what's up for grabs right now isn't just an election, much less the meaning of rock and roll songs. It's the meaning of America itself that's at stake. That line jumped out at me, and I think that's where we're at now. I mean, we get flack for being a sort of two-partisan in this podcast. The W word is always leveled at us, and I think it's too perilous where we're at now to kind of say, oh, we can't talk about this stuff. This is amused. Hey, man, you're supposed to be talking about rock and roll, man.
Yeah, well, yeah, Dave.
Dave
has no patience for that, right? And was always seen as like alarmist or like, we're having a good time. Why do you have to bring all this up? And it's
ruin
like
it.
Everything he said seems pretty timely today. So.
Yeah, I had the other day, I had a friend of Dave's who was more conservative than Dave is come up to me and go, oh, shit, he was right. And it was like, I guess I got to admit that. And if you read the stuff from the 80s on, it's all talking about, the possibility of fascism, the possibility of losing all our basic human rights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how rock and roll was maybe a light and a window that could prevent that or could fight against that.
People get ready, there's a train a-coming. You don't need no baggage, you just get on.
Thank you so much for talking about Dave and Rock and Roll Confidential, Rock and Rap Confidential, everything else. It's been really fantastic. I just want to note the passing of Rick Buckler, the drummer with The Jam, who, I mean, I'm never sure how big The Jam were in America or Paul Weller has been in America. Obviously, they were huge here. Not a punk rock group, but came up in that kind of wave, with the whole kind of mod shtick. And Rick Buckler, really, really decent guy, actually. A really, really, really sweet guy and a pretty great drummer. And quite hard for us to find an actual, standalone interview with Rick Buckler. We've got, a lot of pieces about The Jam and Paul Weller on Rock's Back Pages. But Mark Pringle managed to find a dedicated Rick Buckler interview from 1981. I'm just going to quote from that. It's our friend Mark Ellen, who at that point was editing Smash Hits, 19th of March, 81. And he asks Rick, what's your personal reaction to Paul Weller's lyrics? And Rick says, well, one thing I do like about them is that you can sit down and make your own interpretations of them. I mean, I'll sit down with Paul and say, to me, this song is about this, that, or the other. And he'll say, well, I don't think of it that way. It's kind of like Dave Marsh, right? Yeah. I think that's great because people can actually turn around and relate those things to their own lives. And then he finally says, I think Paul has got that off very well. I suppose the last person to do that was Shakespeare, but I'm not going to say that. But he just did. So there we go. Rick Buckler comparing his Jam bandmates to Shakespeare, which is probably going slightly too far. But they were pretty great in those early days.
They were.
And where do you guys? Danny? Do you have a take on the Jam?
No, everything in America stayed pretty well underground for a long time. I mean, it sort of changes. And it changes the types of bands and stuff with the MTV and things, but the radios did not. I mean, maybe back in New York, you had some radio stations that were playing everything, but we'd have to just find the Jam in import bins and things, travel to buy records like that. But they were like our Who or something. They were very exciting, and we loved them when I was I was high school age at this point. So,
they were almost too too British, though, weren't they? I think that there's certainly in that same, one of the interviews we were running around this in which Rick does speak up, but they're talking about their first tour of America, and they're just greeted with sort of bafflement, really. No one can really understand what the jam means or what their sound is really all about. Maybe they don't have the reference points, but obviously that changed a bit over time, but they do remain resolutely British, I think. And whereas a band from, I'm trying to think of a British band. I mean, obviously like the Stones and even the Who, utilize more American kind of references, right? So, but the Jam sort of never really did. Weller has done, but anyway, that it's farewell to Rick Buckler. Jasper's going to finish. He's just going to talk about a couple of pieces that have been added to RBP in the last couple of weeks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Well, talking as we were earlier about Vulgar and how there's nothing whatsoever wrong with it, Lil' Kim, interviewed by Roy Wilkinson in Select magazine in October 1997. It's a fantastic interview. Lil' Kim is just great. And Roy Wilkinson quotes from a couple of her lewder songs on the album Hardcore. And then writes, of course, such lewd, breathily intoned chat could be dismissed as a kind of rap 0898 number. But such curt rejection would be missing a few points. For one, the sumptuous production job from Notorious Big gives Hardcore a worth far above the average copy of Escort. And beyond these seamless sonic dimensions, Lil' Kim's stance powerfully opens up other areas of debate. Is her frank perusal of sexual interchange a perfectly valid response to the male hip-hop world's infamously basic take on womankind? And I think it's fair to say that it is. I mean, he then continues, if the Lil' Kim who rasps dick to jaw on record is a fearsome prospect, the interview model is vastly different. Understated, courteous, chatty, she giggles merrily at the arrival of a bumper batch of donuts. Today's Lil' Kim is straight-laced, but she's still casually adept at tapping into local sexual mores. Mention the subject and she effortlessly banters on the nudge-nudge nature of British carnality. You mean like Benny Hill? She smiles. Oh, yeah, I love Benny. It's just, it's hilarious. I used to watch him a lot when I was young. I used to love him because it was something your parents never wanted you to see.
It's just hysterical.
Very, very
I
funny.
would never have known what a huge influence Benny Hill was on Lil' Kim.
No, indeed. But I mean, that Hardcore, that record still absolutely stands up, I think. She it's produced very, very well and she's great on it. And why should there be anything wrong with her expression of sexuality on the same level as and in fact, it's much funnier and much more kind of cutting.
That's an important link. She's an important link in a chain too, from old blues singers or whoever you want to reach back to, but to my daughter playing me Megan Thee Stallion and me trying to figure out how to react, it's beyond
Megan Thee Stallion.
Yeah. Or
Cupcake.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So what do you say? What do you say?
Well, I sweat a bit. I don't know what I say. I sweat.
That's becoming a theme of this episode.
In the spring, baby, it's a big mama thing. Can't tell by the diamonds in my ring. That's how many times I wanna come. 21 and another one and another one and another one. 24 cabs, nigga.
The other thing and last thing I'll mention is a piece by Dorian Lynskey in The Guardian from the 27th of February 2021. Record companies have me on a dartboard, the man making millions buying classic hits, about no other than Mercuriadis. And it's an interesting timing that this piece is published and interesting to look back on it now from 4 years, almost to the day later. Dorian Lynskey writes, the current pace of acquisitions is certainly unsustainable. Pretty much every songwriter or estate that wants to sell a catalogue is in the process of doing so, which means the big deals will dry up sooner rather than later. Mercuriadis gives it 2 years. If I achieve everything I want to achieve, you won't remember that Hipgnosis had this incredibly acquisitive streak. What you'll remember is that Hipgnosis was the company that established song management. So that's interesting, given that the Hipgnosis Songs Fund was a publicly traded company and now it's been bought out by one of the big investment
Blackstone, what are they called?
Blackstone, whatever they're called.
Blackstone,
Black Rock
yeah,
too,
Blackstone.
yeah.
There's Black Rock as well, but I don't think it's that
They're
one.
all evil. They're all evil. The names give it away. Yeah.
But it's, I mean, they obviously paid top dollar for various back catalogues. And Dorian Lynskey writes, it will take many more years before we will know whether Mercuriadis' bet on the immortality of classic songs has paid off. He is bullish, but Ted Joyer, who's an interesting writer whose newsletter I subscribe to, writes very interesting about the music business, is skeptical. And he's quoted as saying, songs are a depleting asset. Eventually, the copyright expires and the cash flows stop. So we'll sort of see whose words are more borne out by time, whether it's Merck or Ted Joyer. But I just thought it was interesting, sort of industry piece that's now on Rock's Back Pages, thanks to William.
Did Dave have anything to say about hypnosis, or if not, to your knowledge, what do you think he would have made of that in kind of insanity? Really,
I think calling a song what was it, depreciating asset? We would have gotten an hour and a half out of Dave on that subject.
Yeah, that's good.
But there's a point to be made there.
Sure,
absolutely,
sure. Wonderful. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 196. Our thanks to Daniel Wolff and Danny Alexander for joining us today. You've been a wonderful double act, the two Dannys, and you can find the two Dannys books easily online. And there's a lot, there's some amazing things in there. We didn't even mention, I should have mentioned your book, Daniel, which is about, among other things, Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan. And I'm frantically trying to find the full
Grown-up anger.
Here.
Grown-up anger.
Grown-up anger, that's it. Grown-up anger, the connected mysteries of Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie, and the Calumet Massacre of 1913, which is fascinating. It's a fascinating subject. A Christmas party during a strike in Michigan in 1913 ended in horrific tragedy. And you've written lots of other books, including a book about Asbury Park, Bruce's hometown. And then, Danny, of course, I mentioned your Mary J. Blige book. We're all huge Mary fans at Rock's Back Pages. I was very, very privileged to be flown to New York just to review a show of hers back in, it must have been like 10 years ago. And, so I wrote that up and I really immersed myself in her stuff, and she's amazing. I think she has a new album, isn't she, coming out quite soon?
Yeah, she does. Yeah. It came out in November called Gratitude.
She's
talked like it might be her last record, but we'll see.
Right. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, listeners, please do go out and find those books. And of course, go out and buy Kick Out the Jams, Jibes, Barbs, Tributes and Rallying Cries from 35 years of music writing. That's a great companion piece to Fortunate Son, which really kind of covers Dave's, the earlier period of Dave's writing. It's published in America by Simon & Schuster, and it's just fantastic. Discover Dave Marsh, please, before it's too late. If you enjoy the RBP podcast, please follow it on whichever platforms you use, and please give us a review if you can. Do also visit Rock's Back Pages itself. Check to see if your local library or academic institution subscribes, and if not, maybe suggest they take a free trial of the world's largest archive of music journalism. We will be back in a fortnight with special guest, smash hits and select contributor Sean Pattenden. Catch you then. And in the meantime, it's a farewell and adieu from me, and goodbye from Jasper and our excellent guests. So all together now, in something like perfect harmony, we're going to sing Goodbye.
That concludes episode 196 of the Rock's Back Pages podcast. Many thanks to special guests Daniel Wolff and Danny Alexander. Kick Out the Jams, Jibes, Barbs, Tributes and Rallying Cries from 35 Years of Music Writing by Dave Marsh is published by Simon & Schuster and available now from all good bookshops. The host was Barney Hoskins, and it was co-hosted and produced by Jasper Murison Bowie. The Rock's Back Pages podcast is part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. You can find thousands of articles, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews at rocksbackpages.com.
Kick out the jam! Damn! Kick out the jam! I done kicked them out!
Sorry, Danny, were you trying to get in there and say something?
I think Daniel was.
I'm really sorry.
No.
Because I've got a little script here, and I just then I'm sort of vaguely aware of it. Do you want to like say something which we can do that again if you like?
No, I just would. The only thing I was going to say was when you said, get kick out the jams before it's too late. It's never too late.
Yeah. As I said it, I regretted it. I should have said, get kicked out of the jams, motherfuckers.
Right, exactly.